Human helped an alien girl restore her worn crest. Her gentle description shifted its meaning. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Jake Thompson, a young man from Earth, never imagined his life would take such a strange turn. He had always been content with his routine life in a small Earth town, but that all changed when he was selected for a diplomatic mission on a distant planet. His mission was simple: protect an alien princess. But nothing about it turned out to be simple. As he arrived on the planet, the cold air hit him, the atmosphere thick with an alien tension he couldn't quite place. The planet, much like the species living on it, was different. The buildings were massive, stretching far beyond what any human architecture could dream of, their design sleek and almost otherworldly. Jake's first task was to meet with Serafina, a young alien girl of the Zarn race, whose family had fallen out of favor in their society. Her pride was in her crest, a symbolic piece of her heritage, worn with the weight of generations. But this crest, though magnificent in its design, had been damaged during a long-standing conflict that had broken her people's spirits. It was more than just an object to her. It was a symbol of her identity, her family's legacy, and her place in the world. When Jake first encountered Serafina, she was standing by the window, her back turned as she gazed out at the alien cityscape. Her long silvery hair flowed like a river of starlight, and her posture, though regal, carried a deep sorrow. The crests on her back, intricate patterns of scales that once gleamed with pride, were now dull, worn, and broken. "I don't expect you to understand," she had said quietly when Jake approached. Her voice was gentle, yet tinged with an unmistakable sadness. "This crest is not just a piece of decoration. It's who I am." Jake had no answer. He had never been one to understand the weight of such cultural symbols. But he did understand one thing. He could help her. Using his skills, he began the delicate work of restoring the crest. It wasn't an easy task. This wasn't just about fixing something that was broken. He had to repair the deep spiritual significance embedded in it, something only the Zarn could understand. As the days passed, Jake worked tirelessly, slowly, carefully restoring the ancient patterns on her crest. But what surprised him most wasn't the physical labor. It was the connection they began to build. One evening, as they worked together in the quiet of the palace's great hall, Serafina spoke. "I never thought someone like you, a human, would care so much about something that isn't even yours." Her words were soft, almost hesitant. Jake stopped for a moment, looking up from his work. "It's not about ownership," he said quietly. "It's about helping someone who needs it. That's what matters, right?" Serafina's expression softened, and for the first time since he had met her, Jake saw something like hope flicker in her eyes. "You're right," she whispered, her hand resting gently on the crest. "You've given me more than just a restored crest. You've given me back a piece of myself." The transformation wasn't just in the physical restoration of the crest. It was in the way Serafina saw herself again. With every touch, every careful stroke, Jake had not only repaired an object, but he had also helped her reclaim her dignity. When the work was finally complete, Serafina stood before the mirror, her back straight and proud. The crest shone, not just in its physical form, but in the way it now symbolized the resilience of her people and her spirit. Her gaze met Jake's in the mirror, and for the first time, she smiled. Not a sad smile, but one filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake simply nodded, knowing that the task had meant far more than either of them could have anticipated. Jake had expected things to feel different after restoring Serafina's crest, but he had not expected the quiet that settled over the palace in the following days. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was more like the hush after a long storm, a gentle calm returning in slow breaths. Each morning, the soft light from the twin suns filtered through the crystalline windows, scattering faint blue patterns across the marble floors. Jake often found Serafina standing there, letting the light touch the restored lines of her crest. She no longer looked away from her reflection. She did not shrink into herself as she once had. Instead, she stood tall, as if remembering how it felt to belong in her own skin. One afternoon, as Jake reviewed some equipment logs in the grand hall, Serafina approached with footsteps so quiet he barely heard them. "Jake," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Would you walk with me?" He closed the tablet and nodded, following her into the outer gardens. The air was cool, filled with the scent of iridescent flowers that shimmered when brushed by the wind. Pathways wound around pools of clear water that reflected the sky like polished glass. Serafina led him toward a quiet corner, where a stone bench rested beneath a cluster of tall, pale trees that swayed gently despite the still air. "I have been thinking," she began, her gaze fixed on the pools in front of them. "When you helped restore my crest, you did more than repair patterns or fill in faded marks. You changed what it meant to me." Jake listened, sensing a heaviness in her tone, but not the sorrow he had heard before. "My people see the crest as a record of lineage," she continued, "a symbol of where we come from and how others should view us. It has always been something inherited, something fixed. But when you repaired mine, you worked with such care, as if every line mattered not because of tradition, but because it was a part of who I am now." Jake tried to find the right words, but none came. Serafina turned toward him, her silvery eyes reflecting both suns. "You made me realize something I had never considered. What if meaning is not something we receive, but something we shape?" Jake scratched the back of his neck, humbled. "I just wanted to help." "And you did," she replied. "More than you know." They sat in quiet companionship, the trees whispering faintly above them. Jake watched the surface of the water ripple with each passing breeze. Serafina shifted slightly, her voice calmer now. "There is something else. When you look at me, you do not see someone broken or diminished. You do not see a political burden or a fallen heir. You see me. That is rare here." Jake felt a warmth rise in his chest. "Everyone deserves to be seen," he said simply. Serafina's expression softened, a gentle curve lifting the corners of her lips. "Walk with me again tomorrow?" "Of course," Jake said without hesitation. As they made their way back toward the palace, Jake noticed something in Serafina's posture. Her steps were steadier. Her shoulders no longer carried the weight of invisible expectation. The restored crest shimmered behind her, catching the last light of the setting suns. It looked flawless, yes, but more importantly, it looked alive. And Jake realized something, too. This journey, whatever it was becoming, was no longer just about helping her reclaim a piece of her past. It was about discovering what they could build in the present, one quiet moment at a time. "I am sure," Jake thought, as they walked together through the corridors of the palace, that things would eventually go back to normal. But, in the weeks that followed, he found it harder and harder to shake the growing sense that normal was slipping away. There were moments when he would catch Serafina's gaze from across a room, her silvery eyes shining with unspoken understanding. They had built something, however small, between them, a bond rooted in shared moments and quiet conversations. But Jake wasn't sure if it was friendship or something more. Every day, the line between the two grew more blurred. As they continued their work together, Jake helped Serafina in various ways. They spent countless hours reviewing historical data on her people, exploring new strategies to restore her family's standing among the Zarn. Their conversations were often philosophical, discussing ideas of freedom, heritage, and purpose. One afternoon, while the sunlight gently illuminated the room, casting a soft glow over everything, Serafina turned to Jake with an air of solemnity. "Jake," she said quietly, "do you ever wonder if we can change the course of our own lives?" Her question caught him off guard. He had not expected something so personal to come up so suddenly. "What do you mean?" he asked, unsure of how to respond. She looked away, gazing out of the window at the vast alien landscape beyond. "I've been told all my life that I am a product of my past," she began. "That I must live according to my family's history, according to the expectations placed upon me." She paused, as if weighing her next words. "But what if that's not all we are? What if we can choose our path?" Jake thought for a moment. "Maybe, but I think sometimes the past can teach us what not to do, or what to be careful of. It's not about ignoring it, but learning from it." Serafina turned back to him, a quiet smile playing on her lips. "You're right. But I think I've spent too long listening to everyone else's version of my story. Maybe it's time I wrote my own." Jake nodded, impressed by her introspection. There was something about Serafina that had changed. The more time they spent together, the more he realized how strong she was. Not just physically, though her posture had become more confident, but emotionally and mentally. She had begun to forge a new identity, one that wasn't defined solely by her crest, her family's past, or her people's expectations. The days grew longer as they continued their journey, and Jake's feelings became harder to ignore. They had spent so much time together, so many quiet evenings talking about everything and nothing. And every time she smiled at him, every time their hands brushed as they worked side by side, he couldn't help but feel something stirring within him. One evening, after another long day of work, they found themselves alone on a balcony overlooking the palace grounds. The sky was painted with soft shades of pink and orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. Serafina leaned against the railing, her long silvery hair catching the fading light. "Jake, she paused, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never thought I would find someone like you." Her words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Jake's heart stopped. He had no idea what she meant, but the sincerity in her voice was undeniable. He stepped closer, their proximity now closer than it had ever been before. "Serafina," he began, unsure of how to proceed, but her next words stopped him. "You've shown me more than just kindness," she said softly, her eyes locking with his. "You've shown me what it means to be free." Jake's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her. It was as if something had shifted between them, something unspoken but tangible. And just like that, everything changed. From that moment forward, their connection deepened. It wasn't just about the crest, the duty, or the political machinations. It was about two people standing side by side, choosing to write their own stories, no longer defined by the expectations of others. As the weeks passed, their bond grew stronger, and Jake realized that he had become a part of Serafina's journey, just as she had become a part of his. Their relationship, though still unspoken in many ways, had become something more than either of them had anticipated. It was no longer just about duty. It was about finding meaning in the spaces between their worlds. Jake had always considered himself a practical man. He had never been one for grand gestures or lofty dreams. But as the days went by, standing beside Serafina, seeing the quiet transformation in her, he began to wonder if perhaps he had underestimated what was possible. Their connection had shifted, deepened, something more than just shared tasks and unspoken understanding. It was as if the very air around them had started to hum with a quiet intensity, the space between them charged with something undeniable. They were no longer simply a human and an alien. They were two people, shaped by their pasts, but beginning to forge a path that was their own. One evening, as they walked through the palace gardens after another long day of meetings and planning, Serafina stopped at the edge of the reflecting pool. The night was cool, the stars above shining like distant diamonds. The silence between them was comfortable, but Jake could feel the unspoken words gathering. "Jake," Serafina said, her voice low, almost hesitant. "I have been thinking. About everything. About what you said, how we can choose our own paths." He turned toward her, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, feeling a sudden warmth spread through him despite the cool air. "What about it?" he asked, his voice soft, matching the rhythm of the night. She took a deep breath and looked up at the stars. "I think you were right," she said slowly. "But it's more than just choosing our path. It's about accepting the responsibility that comes with it. I never thought I could change anything. I thought I was just meant to follow the path laid out for me." Jake stepped closer, his boots crunching lightly against the gravel path. "You're not alone in that," he said. "I felt like that too. Like I was just going along with what was expected, not really choosing for myself." Serafina turned to face him fully, her silvery eyes catching the light of the stars, her expression open, vulnerable. "I want to choose, Jake. I want to choose a future where I'm not defined by the expectations of my people. I want to choose a future that's mine." Jake felt a stir of something deep inside him. It was as if, for the first time, he truly saw her. Not just as the alien princess with the crest to restore, not just as the symbol of her people's expectations, but as Serafina, a woman with her own dreams and desires. He took a step forward, his voice steady but filled with a warmth he couldn't quite hide. "I think you deserve that. You deserve a future that's yours, just like anyone else." There was a long pause, the world around them feeling still, almost suspended in time. Then, Seraphina stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "I don't want to do this alone," she said quietly. "I want you by my side, Jake. In whatever this becomes." Jake's heart raced, not from fear, but from something else, a sense of connection, of something real and unspoken taking root. "I'll be with you," he said, his voice low and firm, a promise that felt as natural as breathing. For a moment, they stood there, their hands brushing, the quiet night embracing them. It was a simple moment, but it carried the weight of everything they had shared and everything they hoped for. In that instant, Jake realized that they were no longer just two people from different worlds. They were partners in something greater, something they were both choosing to build together, step by step, as they forged their own path forward. The days ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, expectations to defy, and a future that would require every bit of their strength. But for the first time, Jake felt ready to face it all, with Seraphina by his side, as they both walked into the unknown together. Jake had never imagined that he would find himself in the position he was. Now, standing beside Seraphina, looking out over the grand expanse of the palace gardens. The stars above them seemed to shimmer brighter than ever, and for the first time, Jake felt a deep sense of clarity. There was a sense of peace that had settled between them, as if everything was falling into place, despite the weight of the challenges ahead. The air around them was still, with only the faint rustling of the alien trees in the distance. He glanced over at Seraphina, who stood with a quiet strength, her restored crest catching the light as she gazed toward the horizon. "Jake," she said, breaking the comfortable silence. Her voice was soft, but there was an edge of determination in it that made him turn toward her. "I've been thinking about what you said, about choosing our future." He waited, his heart beating a little faster. He could see the resolve in her eyes, and he knew this moment was something important. "We've come so far," Seraphina continued, her voice steady. "But there's still so much we need to do. I'm not just talking about my family's reputation or the political games we've been playing. I'm talking about what we truly want, what we want to build together." Jake felt a warmth spread through him, something he hadn't fully acknowledged before. It was in the way she spoke, in the way she looked at him now, as if they were not just allies, but something more. "I want to be part of that future with you, Seraphina," he said, his voice firm, but with a softness that he had never allowed himself before. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "You've already proven yourself, Jake. More than I could have ever imagined." She paused, then added, "But we need to start thinking about what happens next. We can't just hope everything will fall into place. We have to take action." Jake nodded. He understood now that the future wasn't something that would just happen. It was something they would have to create, together. But even as they spoke about the future, a part of Jake couldn't help but think about everything that had led them here. He had arrived on this planet as a simple human soldier, with no idea of the impact he would have on the alien world around him. He had never expected to be here, standing beside a princess, helping her reclaim not just her heritage, but her future. It had all started with a simple act of kindness, helping Seraphina restore her crest. But now, it had become something much deeper, something far more meaningful. "What do we do first?" Jake asked, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. Seraphina smiled, the weight of responsibility in her gaze now tempered with something more hopeful. "We start by making sure my people understand that things can be different, that I am not just a symbol to be used or discarded. I am Seraphina, and I will define my future." Her words rang with such certainty that Jake knew, in that moment, that they were both ready for whatever came next. They had faced challenges, but those challenges had only strengthened their bond. Now, they stood at the edge of something bigger, something they could build together, step by step. And for the first time since arriving on this strange planet, Jake felt a deep sense of peace. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were living together. Jake stood beside Seraphina, watching as the planet's twin moons began to rise in the sky, their light casting a soft glow over the palace gardens. The air was cool, a gentle breeze rustling the tall alien trees that surrounded them. They had spent so many hours in these gardens, walking, talking, and planning, but tonight felt different. There was a shift in the air, an unspoken understanding between them that was becoming more apparent with each passing day. Jake had never imagined his life would change in such a way, but now, standing here with Serafina, he realized that everything was shifting around him. She had become more than just the alien princess he was assigned to protect. She had become someone he deeply respected, someone he admired not just for her strength, but for her quiet resolve and the way she saw the world. "Jake," Serafina said, her voice breaking the silence, soft but carrying the weight of something important. He turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. "I've been thinking a lot about what's next, about what we've been planning." He nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I think it's time we stopped just thinking about it and actually started making it happen," she said, her gaze steady. "We can't keep waiting for the right moment. We have to take control of our future, now." Jake felt the same resolve in her voice that he had seen in her actions over the past few weeks. She had always been driven, but now there was a new fire in her. "What do you have in mind?" he asked, intrigued. Serafina's eyes sparkled in the moonlight, a quiet determination in them. "We start with the council. My people need to see that I am not just a figurehead. I am not someone to be used in political games. I am a leader, and I will fight for the future I believe in. But I can't do it alone. I need you, Jake. I need your help to make this happen." Jake's heart swelled with pride, and without thinking, he reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I'm with you, Serafina. I always will be." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and he could see a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. They stood in the garden for a moment longer, the sound of the wind filling the quiet space between them. The palace, the politics, the expectations, everything seemed far away in that moment. It was just the two of them, standing together, knowing that what they were about to face would change everything. The next day, they took their first step toward making that change. Serafina called a meeting with the council, a group of influential leaders from her people who had long held power in the Zarn Dominion. Jake stood by her side, his role not just as her protector, but as her ally. The council chamber was grand, with high ceilings that echoed their every word. As Serafina addressed the council, Jake could see the tension in the room. Her presence alone had caused ripples, but it was her words that would determine the future. "I am not the person you think I am," she said, her voice unwavering. "I am not here to play the games of politics, to be used as a pawn in your struggles. I am here to lead, to guide my people to a future where we define our destiny, not one imposed upon us." Her words resonated through the room, and Jake could see the council members exchanging looks. Some were skeptical, others intrigued, but all were listening. Serafina's confidence had shaken the foundations of what they knew, and for the first time in a long while, Jake saw her standing not as a princess, but as a leader. The council meeting stretched on, with heated debates and discussions, but Serafina stood her ground. Jake couldn't help but feel proud. This was more than just politics. It was the beginning of something new. After the meeting, as they walked back through the palace halls, Serafina turned to him, a small smile on her face. "We've made a difference today," she said, her voice filled with quiet satisfaction. Jake nodded, his heart still racing from the intensity of the council meeting. "We have," he agreed, "and we're just getting started." It was the first time he had truly believed that. Together, they were not just waiting for a future to unfold. They were going to create it themselves. Days passed, and Serafina and Jake continued their journey, the weight of their responsibilities growing heavier with each step. But in the midst of it all, something had changed between them. What started as an alliance, forged out of necessity, had evolved into something deeper, something far more meaningful. The palace was alive with anticipation. The council, though resistant at first, had begun to acknowledge Serafina's leadership. Yet, despite the progress, there was still much work to be done. Jake watched Serafina as she stood by the window, her posture taller than he had ever seen it before. Her once downtrodden spirit had transformed into one of quiet power, and it radiated from her. She had stepped into her own, no longer bound by the chains of expectation. But Jake also saw the weight of the burden on her shoulders. Every decision she made now carried the weight of her people, and the pressure was undeniable. One evening, after a long day of meetings, they found themselves alone on the balcony once again. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and purple. Serafina leaned against the railing, her silvery hair catching the light. Jake stood beside her, feeling the stillness between them. "Jake," she said softly. Sometimes I wonder if I'm ready for this. For everything that's ahead. Jake turned to her, his voice steady. You are more ready than anyone I've ever met. I've seen it. I've seen you become someone I never thought possible. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for something, as if she were looking for reassurance. I don't want to fail them, she whispered. I don't want to let them down. Jake took a step closer to her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. You won't, he said, his voice unwavering. You've already done more than anyone could have asked for. Your people see that now, and I see it too. She met his gaze, the weight of her words lingering between them. Then, as if the moment was just too much to bear, Serafina stepped away from the railing and turned toward him. But what about us, Jake? What about this? Her voice was softer now, filled with something she hadn't fully allowed herself to acknowledge. Jake's heart raced, but he remained calm. He had spent so long trying to keep his emotions in check, but in this moment, with her standing before him, the truth was undeniable. I don't know what the future holds for us, Serafina, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. But I do know this. Whatever happens, I want to face it with you. I'm here for you. Always. Serafina's eyes softened, the vulnerability she had hidden so well finally coming to the surface. You've given me more than anyone ever has, Jake. More than I ever thought possible. I don't know what I would do without you. Jake smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. You'll never have to find out. I'm right here. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared words hanging in the air, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Jake felt a sense of peace. They had come so far, and the road ahead was still uncertain. But with Serafina by his side, Jake felt ready for anything. They didn't need to have all the answers right now. Together, they would find their way. And as the last light of the day faded, they knew they were no longer just two people from different worlds. They were partners in a future they were about to build, hand in hand, step by step. Jake and Serafina stood side by side, watching the twin moons rise higher in the night sky. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of alien flora, and the soft hum of the palace echoed around them. The journey they had started together had come a long way, yet the true test was just beginning. The council had been shaken by Serafina's words, and now, the real challenge was to bring about the change she had spoken of. It wasn't going to be easy, but as Jake glanced over at her, he knew one thing for certain. They weren't doing it alone. Serafina had begun to gather support, speaking with the key leaders in the palace and beyond. Jake had seen the way her presence commanded respect, not just as a princess, but as a leader in her own right. The transformation in her was remarkable. Where once she had been hesitant, bound by her family's expectations, now she stood firm, her resolve unwavering. And Jake, ever by her side, couldn't help but feel a deep sense of admiration for the woman she had become. As days turned into weeks, their plans began to take shape. Serafina's voice was being heard, not just among her own people, but among those who had once doubted her. Slowly but surely, the tides were shifting in their favor. The council meetings had become more productive, the debates more constructive. And yet, despite the growing support, there were still whispers of doubt, still factions that resisted change. It's never easy, is it? Serafina asked one evening as they walked through the palace halls, her gaze thoughtful. Jake glanced at her, noting the weariness in her eyes, despite her steady determination. No, but I think that's what makes it worth it, he replied, his voice calm. If it were easy, it wouldn't be worth fighting for. Serafina smiled softly at his words, the quiet strength of her character shining through. You've been my rock, Jake. I don't know what I would have done without you. Jake felt a warmth spread through him at her words, a sense of pride that came from knowing he had played a part in her journey. I'm just glad to be here with you, he said simply. Their footsteps echoed through the corridors, the sound mingling with the hum of the palace. The future was still uncertain, and the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. But they were no longer just fighting for Serafina's future. They were fighting for a future together. A future where they could define their own destinies, unshackled by the expectations of the past. As they reached the courtyard, Jake looked up at the night sky, the stars twinkling above them like distant beacons. There was so much left to do, but for the first time, Jake felt confident. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And that was enough. Serafina looked up at the stars as well, her eyes filled with a quiet hope. Together, she echoed softly, the word a promise, a vow that carried more weight than either of them could fully understand. It was more than just a partnership. It was a bond forged through shared purpose, strength, and trust. With Serafina by his side, Jake knew they were ready for whatever the future held. The journey was just beginning, but with each step, they were creating something new, something worth fighting for. Weeks passed, and the plan they had set in motion was finally beginning to show results. The council, though still hesitant at times, had started to embrace Serafina's vision for the future. The support she had built was growing, and with it, the confidence in her leadership. Jake watched as she navigated through the delicate balance of politics, her every decision carrying the weight of her people's hopes. He had always admired her strength, but now he saw something more. He saw the woman who had stepped into her true power. Their time together had deepened their bond, and though they had not spoken of it often, there was no mistaking the connection between them. It was a bond that had grown from respect and mutual understanding, but it was also something deeper, something that neither of them could fully define. As the days turned into nights, and the nights into weeks, they found themselves standing at the threshold of a new beginning. A new future was unfolding, one that they had created together. But with that future came more challenges. The resistance to Serafina's rise to power was not gone. It was only lying in wait, biding its time. There were still factions within the council, still whispers of doubt and fear. The political landscape was far from secure, and they knew that the next steps would be the hardest yet. Yet, there was an undeniable energy between them, a shared purpose that drove them forward. Serafina had become more than just the woman who had once been a princess. She had become a force, a leader who was not afraid to challenge the status quo. And Jake, standing beside her, had become more than just her protector. He was her equal, her partner in this journey. One evening, after another long day of negotiations and discussions, Jake found himself alone with Serafina in the gardens once more. The stars above them twinkled, their light casting a soft glow on the landscape below. Serafina leaned against the railing, her eyes lost in thought. Jake stood beside her, sensing that she was carrying something heavy. "What's on your mind?" he asked quietly. She turned to him, her silvery eyes reflecting the light of the stars. "I'm thinking about everything that's happened, and everything that's still to come," she said, her voice soft but filled with determination. "We've come so far, Jake, but the real test is still ahead of us." Jake nodded, his gaze steady. "We'll face it together, Serafina. Whatever comes next, we're in this together." She smiled, a small but genuine smile, the kind that reached her eyes and softened the weight in her chest. "I'm not sure what I would do without you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake's heart swelled with affection. "You'll never have to find out. I'm not going anywhere." They stood there in silence for a while, the soft sounds of the garden around them. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Jake felt sure of one thing. Whatever happened, they would face it side by side. Together, they had already accomplished so much, and there was no limit to what they could do if they continued to stand by each other. The future was theirs to create, and for the first time in a long time, Jake felt ready to embrace whatever came next.